Now it's my pleasure to introduce a guy that he'll tell you all about himself. So I'm just gonna introduce him. As on your paper there is Colonel Fred Maddox, retired. He'll tell you about going into the service, and I think he spent like 33 years. And this guy's still flying. He's so busy. I don't know. Where'd you go, Fred? There he is. I thought you started up behind me here. Yeah. So Fred actually lives north of Hutchinson, farms north of Lyons, and belongs to the Sterling American Legion Post. So I'm going to give you the mic. If you want to stand up and wander, that's up to you, but he wants you in front of the camera over here. Just in front of the table. So, okay, right here. So you take this mic, and I may ask you something.
First of all, thank you for all coming. It's good to see all the veterans out here. Got a question for all of you. How many of you as a young child had a dream and that dream got to come true? If you did, raise your hand. The reason why I bring that up, my military career actually started back in the 6th grade in Whitewater, Kansas, in the elementary school. I had a teacher who said, you need to write a 10-page term paper on anything. Well, back in those days, we didn't type yet, so we had to handwrite it by cursive. And Mr. Merritt read every one of those term papers every year. I kept looking up as a young child and seeing B-52s flying out of Wichita. I'd just stand there and go, that's a big old bird. I don't know how it can fly, but man, I want to fly that. So I wrote a term paper on the B-52. It was very hard to find any information on the B-52 at that time, back in the mid-60s. And to get to the 10th page, I had to come up with a real good paragraph, so I would have 10 pages to hand in. And I'm going to quote to you the very last paragraph that was in that term paper. My dream is to someday fly the B-52. That was in the 6th grade. 3 years later, when I moved up to high school, Mr. Merritt became the high school counselor. About 2 or 3 weeks into school, he called me into his office, set me down, said, I've probably read 10,000 term papers in my life, but there's only one that sticks in my mind, and that was the one you wrote. He said, you still want that dream? I said, I want it. He said, go get good grades, keep your nose clean, stay out of trouble, and I'll see what I can do for you. 2.5 years later, he called me in, said, I have an appointment to the Air Force Academy. So, age 18, I graduated from Remington High School. I walked out of the graduation line. 3 days later, I packed a bag. I went to Colorado Springs in Colorado. And I started 9 weeks of hell for basic training. The cadets conducted the basic training out there, upperclassmen. And you got to do everything that they got to do, because if they could survive it, you was going to survive it. And once I got through basic training, school started. School was a piece of cake. Learned one thing: keep the ears open and the mouth shut. Learned a lot. During the summers, instead of going out and visiting bases, I was taking my ground aeronautical school. I was getting my pilot's license, and when I graduated in the spring of '72 from the Air Force Academy, I was already carrying my pilot's license with me. The fun started then. Upgrade training, I got to go to this great little base in Mississippi called Columbus. Columbus people did not like the military. So it was 12 weeks of upgrade training of staying on base, keeping your nose clean, and doing nothing but studying. Graduated from there, and they sent me to another wonderful place, a place called Castle Air Force Base, California. I did 6 weeks of B-52 upgrade training there as a co-pilot. I was never so happy to see California in the rearview mirror as I was when I left California. Swore I would never go back. But there's a continuation of that story. I showed up at a little base called Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas, up in the northeast corner of Arkansas, 3 miles from the Missouri border, 6 miles from the Mississippi River, coldest place on earth in the wintertime because of the humidity. But I showed up on a Monday, signed in, went to personnel. The young airman looked at me and said, "Lieutenant, can you wear the same shirt and pants for the next 4 days?" I said, "Well, I guess so." He said, "Good. You'll be on a tanker to Guam Friday morning." Guam? Yeah, that's where your unit's at. You'll go join your unit. So Saturday afternoon, I landed on Guam. Got assigned to a crew as a co-pilot. Major Davis was my aircraft commander. And about the middle of November, he looked at me and he said, "We got to go to a classified briefing." That's all he told me, is we got to go to a classified briefing. So we go in there, and there's a 2-star general giving this briefing. And the 2-star general says, "I have a couple of special missions, and I need My aircraft commander's hand was already in the air before the word volunteer come out of that man's mouth. Well, we got volunteered. 10 days later, President Nixon said, "Bring him to the peace table." Linebacker 2. 22 years old, scared to death, first combat mission, Hanoi, Vietnam. Now, I'm going to tell you something about flying off of Guam that a lot of people don't know. At the end of the runway at Guam, there's a 500-foot cliff. There's no overrun on the runway. We was taking those B-52s off from Guam so heavy, we didn't even try to lift off. We just drove them right off the edge of the cliff. And then we prayed we got some airspeed and we got some lift. Went to Hanoi, first mission. Sent 6 B-52s in. 3 of them was shot down by SAMs. 3 of them come home. Like I said, I was at that point still keeping my ears wide open. Now, on a B-52, that airplane looks real big. Believe me, folks, it's not real big. I cannot stand up in a B-52, and I'm a short person. And there's about 2 foot between the pilot and the co-pilot. So we can have a conversation up there without being on headsets or talking on interphone. I looked at him and I said, how's come it wasn't us? He turned me into a cocky, arrogant, conceited person that day. I'm sorry, Angela, now you know where I got it from. He said I did everything right. God was on my side. Now shut up and see if you can fly this airplane back to Guam. I stayed with Major Davis after we redeployed back to Blytheville on his crew for about a year. During that year, I did some of the most scariest things that I ever had to learn to do. I didn't mind taking a B-52 off when I got the chance to take a B-52 off. I didn't mind landing a B-52 when I got a chance to land a B-52 by myself. But I sure hated putting that B-52 up behind that KC-135 to try to take some gas, because there was only 24 foot between those two big airplanes flying 350 knots. And it took talent. So I stayed at Blytheville until middle of 1975. I got an offer made to me by the company. How many of you know what the company is? CIA. Special duty, 18 months, looking for volunteers. I said, why not? So I went to work for the company for 18 months. I went to Laos and Cambodia, and I flew anything from a Cessna 150 to a C-123 aircraft. It was whatever you chose to do that day. And come back out of that stronger. Went back to Blytheville. Got there, and they said, well, we don't need you no more. You're going to Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. And the reason why you're going down there is you're going to learn a new part of the B-52G weapon system that they was installing. So I got to go to Robins in 1976 to 1977 and learn that system, and it was a great system. It made the B-52 an all-weather airplane. We had infrared on the front of it. If it was so foggy you couldn't see your hand right there, didn't bother us. We was going to war. We could see the runway. We could see the runway to land with it. Upgraded on that. In 1978, I left Robins. Now somebody's going to think I'm stupid, but I kept going back to Blytheville Air Force Base. There's a man back here I was talking to earlier, but I kept going back to Blytheville Air Force Base because I loved it. It was a SAC base, stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody even knew we existed. So, went back to Blytheville. I got called into the commander's office. Now, I'm 3 months away from making captain. And the commander looks at me and he goes, just stood there and shook his head. I'm going, what'd I do? He says, I got to make you an aircraft commander as a first lieutenant because there is nobody else. Well, Carter had gone and said we're going to have the early out program. Everybody thought the young airmen would get out, the young officers would get out. Didn't work that way. We had junior and senior NCOs going out the door faster than you could count them. We had majors, lieutenant colonels going out the door faster than we could count them, and we just had a mid-range rank gap. But it jump-started my career. Didn't know it at the time, but it jump-started my career. So I became an aircraft commander in 1978. Later that year, we did what we called the Alchemy activation on the B-52, Air-Launched Cruise Missile. And I got assigned to a special unit called the Site Activation Task Force. Now I was really starting to meet some very important people in my career, because no longer was I talking with lieutenant colonels and colonels. I was now talking with generals and 2-star generals and 3-star generals, and my name was getting out there, even though like I said, I didn't realize what was going on, but my name was getting out there that I got the job done. So I stayed with SATAF, finished up that tour, went back to the good old 97th Bomb Wing at Blytheville again, and started flying B-52s. And then one day they walked in and said, "Oh, you got to go learn how to fly the KC-135 because you're in SAC and you got to be dual qualified." So I had to go fly the the KC-135 for 9 months to get certified on it. (1980), as I said, I was starting to meet a lot of generals. Got called up by a 3-star general and said, "I got a slot for you at Kirtland Air Force Base. I want you to run a test program for us." It's on the B-52, and you work directly for me. Nobody in between. Well, there was a lot of people at Kirtland that thought they was in between. Unfortunately, that general told them they wasn't in between. And spent a year out there. Let me back up a little bit. 1978, I met a young lady. She was a dream. She was the dream of my life. We got married. We started to pursue a family. We was told that we probably would not be able to have children. We adopted a young lady, a 5-year-old girl. She is, as far as I'm concerned, she is our daughter. Okay? My wife at the time, and this is for all the wives here, she raised my kids while I was out running around all over the world because I was never home, believe me. And anyway, so in 1982, come back, or 1983, here we go again. I got out of Kirtland. They said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas." So I went, they sent me back. And I went back to the 97th Bomb Wing again. And late in 1983, again, said I was getting to be known real well. I got a call from a 3-star general. He said, I got something for you, Fred. Need a volunteer. And I said, "Sir, not being disrespectful, but I learned not to volunteer." He said, "You want to go to the B-1 bomber program?" I about jumped out of my boots. But I said, "Sir, I got to talk this over with my family because this is a family decision. This is just not my decision." So I went home that night. We talked it over. I told my wife, I said, "You're never going to see me again because I'm going to be gone all the time." She said, "Go for it." So I went for it. So I showed up in 1984 at Dallas Air Force Base, Texas. 7 days after I showed up, I got shipped out to Palmdale, California. And Edwards Air Force Base, California. Our training consisted of learning how to fly the F-15. Now, we're old B-52 pilots. These things are hot rods. I mean, they are vicious. We had to learn how to fly the FB-111. All because the B-1 had new flight control systems, and we had to use those airplanes to learn how the B-1 was going to react when we started flying it. Well, I'm going to put Angela on the spot here because she's a real good friend. If you was the commander of 4 arrogant, cocky, conceited, best of the best, second to none pilots, and you had to select one to deliver the first B-1 to Dyess Air Force Base, what would you do? No. She needs me for a project. Had a very smart wing commander. He wasn't going to incriminate himself. He said, "You're number 1, you're number 2, you're number 3, you're number 4. He put the numbers in a hat. Draw. Whoever gets number 1 gets to deliver first B-52 or B-1 bomber. Boy, did I get lucky. Back to Palmdale I go to get a B-1. I leave Palmdale. I got every politician in the United States in Dyess Air Force Base at that time. I get to Edwards Air Force Base that night and that airplane breaks. I call up the wing commander. I tell him it's broke. The ETA on it's 3-4 days, if we're lucky. He says, "I got to have a B-1 tomorrow at 12:15. I said, "You'll have a B-1. He said, "What?" I said, "You'll have a B-1. So I got with the aerospace commander out there, and I said, "I want that B-1A that's sitting over there to take to Dyess Air Force Base tomorrow, and nobody at Dyess is going to know any difference. All they're going to know is they got a B-1. The points started rolling right there. Quick thinking. Got rid of the politicians, took the A model back to Edwards, brought in our first B-1 bomber. Now, that airplane was so challenging, it had very little tech data written on it. Right up front, we was told 3 air crews would lose their life in the first year, that we would lose 3 airplanes on the ground due to maintenance mishaps in the first year. We was very used to working on old airplanes that we knew everything about. Now we had us a Cadillac that we didn't know anything about. So our flying schedule looked like Monday morning takeoff, 7 o'clock, Friday evening, 6 o'clock land. And anytime we could get that airplane airborne before noon and back on the ground before 6 o'clock, Monday through Friday, we had a successful week. We had a lot of unsuccessful weeks, let me tell you. But we was learning the power curve. Well, we got a whole lot better. And my job was to push the envelope. So we went from one mission a week, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're moving right along. One night, I was really going to push the envelope. It was Christmas Eve. I got that bad airplane airborne at 5:25 in the evening. And I said, I'm going to fly the whole mission. I got back to Dyess Air Force Base around 1:45 and I called down after I did a couple of flybys. I called down to ask maintenance. I said, would you let me have another takeoff? Yeah, we don't care. We want to see some afterburners at night. So I landed and I taxied back up into the north end of the runway. Pulled on the runway. Put all 4 afterburners up to 106%. Down the runway I went around, landed, debriefed the airplane. Next morning, 8:30, wing commanders call me at the house. Yes, sir, what's the problem? Time did you take off the second time last night? Oh, a few minutes before midnight. He said, yeah, I know. You scared Santa Claus all the way out of Texas, didn't you? He was trying to be very humorous when he was wanting a piece of my butt, let me tell you. He said, what do you got to say for yourself? And I said, sir, we can fly at night now. I just certified that airplane for nighttime takeoffs, and we can fly 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So now we had one more big issue we had to beat at Dyess Air Force Base, and that was called our Integrated Operational Checkout. That proved that we could train the crews, we could fly missions, and we could do what we was trained to do in the Strategic Air Command, and that was to carry nuclear weapons. So we had our big exercise. Again, I had a shrewd wing commander, and I never dreamed I was ever going to get to where he was at. So he took us 4 cocky, arrogant pilots, and he said, you're going to run my command post for this IOC. You know the airplane better than anybody? Why not? And then you're going to fly the mission afterwards. So we got the IG there, Inspector General. We're playing their little game. They hand me an input. I look at it. I wad it up, throw it in the trash. Inspector looks at me and goes, aren't you going to work? I said, no, we got redundant systems. We're evil. We're going to war. They just couldn't stop us. They tried their hardest, but they couldn't stop us. Well, went through the nuclear generation. 2 days later, we did the fly-off. Okay, Angela, you're back to wing commander again. You got 4 arrogant, cocky, second. Again, he said, pull a number. That's how it's going to be. I'm not going to argue with you guys. So I drew number 3 this time. We had never done what we called a minimum interval takeoff with a B-1. We did it all the time with B-52s. 15 seconds between airplanes. Never had a problem. Never thought we'd have a problem. Well, that morning, took off. First ship took off, goes straight out and up. Second ship takes off, goes to the left. Third ship takes off, goes to the right. And that's when I created my famous statement. Well, shit. I just went from 220 knots airspeed to about 150. I hit dead air, and I thought she was going to go right on over. And I nosed her over, quick reaction, and she bit, and we got airborne. We come back that night, Yeah, the general in charge of the IG team said, we changed the procedures after your ride. I said, he said, what was the pucker factor on that takeoff this morning on a scale of 1 to 10? 19. The B-1 was a great airplane. Tried to kill me several times. I had an incident where I went to put up the nose landing gear and then it decided not to come back down again. I had an incident with a B-1 where I brought the wings forward and they decided they wasn't going to come forward anymore. Now that's a real head scratcher, because now do I have even any hydraulics for flight controls, brakes, or anything to help get this thing stopped when I go to land? Normal landing speed on a B-1 was 180 knots. I brought that one in at 260 knots. You can imagine what the brakes looked like at the end of 10,000 foot, because I stood on them. But I got her stopped. I got a chance to do a lot of great things. We had morale flights. 1989, I became a squadron commander. I believed in the word team. I didn't believe in the word I. I used to tell my troops, somebody goes TDY and their spouse has a flat tire, 13 people is going to show up at that house to change that tire. 12 people to lift the car off the ground and 1 person to change the tire. But I wanted good squadron morale. So every Friday afternoon, we'd have a B-1 in the area around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Day shifts getting ready to go home, swing shifts coming on work. And we'd do something for the maintenance troops and the support personnel troops, because everybody knew it was something was going to happen around 4 o'clock, give or take 4 or 5 minutes. So I was flying one day, and they said, it's your show. I had been working on a procedure of the V1 that said couldn't be done. It was called a horizontal roll. Every engineer said, I'm sorry, I'm getting out of the way of the camera. Every engineer said it couldn't be done, the wings would snap off. So to prove the engineers wrong and prove the world that I was right, I rolled it right over the runway. And then I broke the sound barrier climbing out. I got to meet the wing commander real good that afternoon. His statement to me was, your checkbook is not big enough to be doing what you're doing. So, in 1989, my mom and dad was killed in a car accident. I buried them on the 22nd of December. Excuse me, let me back up here. 1990. And I buried them on the 22nd of December. I was staying with some family members, and on the 27th of December, I got a phone call from my squadron. He said, sir, you got orders to go to Saudi Arabia, but you're on emergency leave. We can get somebody else to take them. This is 6 o'clock in the morning. I said, what time do I deploy? They said, 6 o'clock tonight. I said, I'll be there. I walked downstairs. I told my family, you got 15 minutes to be in the car or you're staying. I made some good time between Hillsboro, Kansas and Mundy, Texas. And then I found the first state trooper. He didn't like that 85 and a 65. He asked me where I was going so fast. I told him. He handed me my driver's license and registration back, and he said, "Get one for me." He said, "Keep it running at 85. I got 20 miles south of Abilene, Texas. Here comes a state trooper. Red light comes on, flips a U-turn, comes through the median. I go, "Oh boy, here we go again." He pulls up beside me. First trooper had taken my address off my driver's license, called it to the second trooper, and told me he would escort me to my house. So, as I said, I buried my parents right before Christmas. So that meant that my children's Christmas was still sitting under the Christmas tree. Not a word was said from my children about not having Christmas. I went to Saudi Arabia. They sent me up north in Saudi Arabia to a little place called Al Shawam. It had a runway. That's all it had was a runway. We slept underneath airplanes for 3 weeks. We ate MREs for 3 weeks. We didn't take a shower for 3 weeks. We flew missions for 3 weeks. Finally, the Red Horse team come in, and we got us a base in about 48 hours, and we got a shower. Boy, did that feel good. But on the 15th of January, 1991, all the commanders and flag staff, or flag commanders, was called to Saudi Arabia Central Command, and we all got a briefing by General Schwarzkopf. It was a top secret briefing, and it was said, "You will speak nothing of this after you leave this room." We all got our orders for January 16th. The night that we went to Baghdad. Now, I've got almost 20 years in the service, and I'm a commander of young men, 24, 25 years old. I know they're terrified because I'm terrified, but I can't show them I'm terrified. I got to show them that I'm the leader. Everything we did that night, there was no communications. What I'm trying to explain here is if I was supposed to launch an airplane at 1:15 plus 15 seconds, we was talking seconds. We was not talking minutes between airplanes. We was talking seconds. And this was happening all over Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and we had no communication. We did this all communication outage. We did not talk to another airplane until after our mission was over. The F-17s went to Baghdad. We didn't know if they made it or not. We're 250 miles north of them. We know we're going in 7.5 minutes after they do. We also know if they didn't get there, we wasn't coming home. Because if they didn't get their targets, we wasn't going to be able to get our targets. And let me tell you, that was one light show at Baghdad that night. They couldn't find us. They were just throwing bullets everywhere and launching missiles everywhere. But we come in and we got them. On the way back, I pulled up on the tanker. We got any KC-135 people in here by chance besides me? Okay. I'm hooked up to the boom, and I go, hey, boom, how many airplanes did you refuel? He said, you're number 14. I said, how's come I'm only counting 13? Now, this boomer and I have known each other for years. And he can talk to me the way, he's an enlisted man, but he can talk to me the way he talked to me. And he went, sir, you're so damn stressed you're not counting yourself. Well, he brought me out of my little spell because he was right. I was not counting myself. But I took 14 airplanes in and I took 14 airplanes home. Then we got the easy missions. After that, we got to go fly cap and look for the Saudis. And I got to call Central Command one day and I said, hey, folks, I need some help out here. And they said, well, what do you need? I said, send me a Marine, send me a soldier, send me something because I got about 1,000 Iraqi soldiers that have just put the white flag up over, and I'm on top of them with my F-15, and I can't hurt them any place. You know, they surrendered to me in an F-15. So I finally got a couple of guys come down, and they marched about 1,000 Iraqis off. And the 100-hour war was going on, and we knew it was coming to an end. And I got the second call from the general, and his orders was, I need 3 U.S. F-15s, airborne in 10 minutes, fully loaded, fully armed. You will go direct to Kuwait City. You will go direct to Kuwait City at Mach 2.5. You will turn north at Kuwait City up Highway 1. And when you see a line of trucks, there will be no more trucks left when you're done. Well, speed of sound, it took us exactly 4 minutes to go from my base to Kuwait City at Mach 2.5. And when we made the turn, we had to hit the air brakes because we was right on top of them. And we made our run, and we made one run. That was it. I mean, believe me, this tears me up nowadays, okay? But it was a job to do at that time. We wiped out the majority of the Royal Guard that day. And we stayed on site until the Apache helicopter showed up, and then we went home calling bingo on fuel. I got sent home. Finally got home in August. Walked in the front door of my house. There stood the Christmas tree, and there stood the Christmas presents. The Christmas lights was still hanging on the house, glowing every night. Didn't affect my kids one bit. The people kidded them about the fact why you got Christmas lights on in July. A lot of the kids down there didn't understand what Dad was going through and what they was going through. My wife sent a letter while I was in Saudi Arabia. She addressed it to my dearest husband, United States Air Force, somewhere in the world, because that's all she knew to do. I got that letter about 3 months after I got home, returned in the mail. It was the greatest letter I'd ever had. Okay? So, took a lot of courage to think of something like that, but she was trying to track me down. So I went back to Dias, still as a squadron commander. As many people as I irritated, and if I'm getting long-winded, throw a beer bottle at me, okay? Yeah. And I made full bird colonel. I don't know how I made full bird colonel because I was not a politician. I told them how it was. I told them I'll do my job, but I will not bend the rules too much. So I made full bird colonel. I became vice wing commander at Dyess Air Force Base. And then I become wing commander at Dyess Air Force Base. I'm not that good. You know, how I'm doing this, I don't know. And I got people looking at me and saying, how are you making rank? You must have some powerful friends. Well, I look back over the years, I did have some powerful generals that were still looking out after me. Couple of things I forgot to tell you. There's a couple of conflicts in there that we didn't want to talk about much. Panama. I ran the KC-135 Central Command Post for the Panama. My job was to fly 14 tankers. I went in that night. Boss looked at me and he said, I hope you're a damn you got magic in your hip pocket. He said, I'm supposed to have 14 tankers and I only got 13. I told the boss to go home, get a good night's sleep. Come in the next morning, boss looked at me and said, what'd we do? I said, 14 for 14. How'd you do it? Sir, you do not want to know. I had an inbound tanker coming in from another base. It landed. Its crew went into crew rest. I gained the airplane, put my air crew on it, flew the mission, landed the airplane, transferred it back to the other base, and 3 days later, I got the phone call. Had a job to do. I'm sorry. Bosnia sent us to a little place on the east coast of France, Ithaca. Believe me, don't want to go to Ithaca. They forgot about us. NATO. We sat over there for 6 weeks. And finally we told NATO we was going home. They didn't need us. They hadn't used us. They'd plumb forgot they'd put us there. Then the sad day, September 11th, 2001. I'm sure all of you remember what you was doing at the time. I'll tell you what I was doing at the time. I was flying a B-52. I was in the low-level pattern out over Richmond, Virginia, heading south, 500 foot off the deck. All of a sudden, I got a squawk on the radio, and I'd never heard that frequency squawk before in my life, except for a test. It was asking me how many packs I had on board, what my fuel was, what my armament was. I'm not talking to the military anymore, folks. I'm talking to the NSA. My directions was to go out over the East Coast, 150 miles east of Washington, D.C., set up a 75-mile orbit, and if any commercial aircraft entered that orbit area and did not change its flight path, we was to take it out. There's a lot of questions going through my head. I don't know nothing about the towers, folks. I have to look, I'm communicating with my crew. We're trying to figure out how 3 out of 4 can survive if we have to do this. Well, fortunately, all 4 of us got to survive. I got home that night, 6 o'clock. It's the first time I found out what happened. I was ready to go to war again. And I did. I did Desert Freedom. So now I'm getting to the end of my career because they're telling me I'm too old and I'm too slow. They forgot about one thing, the encyclopedia that's up here. But they take the B-1s out of McConnell, so I call it manpower, and I said, "Where's the next assignment at?" This tech sergeant I'm talking to says, "Well, I'll send you to South Korea or I will send you to Iceland." I said, "Thank you, Sergeant, for telling me it's time to retire. My boss won't." Decided to retire from McConnell. I went on terminal leave, and I've been on terminal leave for 2 weeks. And General Light calls me up and says, "Fred, I got to activate you again." What? He says, "Yeah, you report back to McConnell on Monday." So I go and check in, go to manpower. I said, "Haven't got a clue what's going on. I got a 3-star general telling me to report." This young airman looks at me and says, "Yeah, here's your package. You're going to England." England. Somebody else wanting to talk about England? General Light had realized that I had had 7 campaigns in my career. Now I have to read them. There were so many. Vietnam, Grenada, Bosnia, Panama, Desert Storm, Desert Freedom. There was one missing and the general caught it. He sent me to England so I could fly a B-52 to Afghanistan, drop one bomb on some mountain out in the middle of nowhere so I wouldn't get hurt, so I could get the Afghan medal. Well, I got back to McConnell. I told him, "Thank you, sir." And I said, "By the way, I'm not buying a new rack just to put on one new medal." So that was basically the end of my career. It was long. It was fun. I did forget one thing. The worst day of my life in the military, 2 worst days of my life. In August of '92, I was flying a precursor mission for Ellsworth Air Force Base, B-1 unit up there, down over Possum Kingdom Lake in north central Texas, in a T-38. Hit a flock of geese doing 500 knots, 500 foot off the ground. 3 seconds later, I was out of the airplane. Total reaction. I got my ejection. They told me I'd never walk again. I told them I will walk again, and I walked again. Second worst day in my military career. It was December 15th, and you can tell it was a bad day if I can remember the day. December 15th, 1993. 11 o'clock at night. I had a B-1 aircrew fly into a mountain out in West Texas. I told you I was a team player. I knew every wife's name that was in my squadron. That night I had to go visit 4 of them to tell them their husbands wasn't coming back. It was a very long night. very solemn night. But the moral of this story is, the next morning I had a chief master sergeant and myself sit down and we discussed our squadron Christmas party. And I told him, Chief, I am not going to bury 4 of my finest on Friday morning and have a Christmas party Friday night. You tell the enlisted men in my squadron if they want their money back for their ticket for the Christmas party, come see me, they will get their money back. I said, Chief, you take all the gifts we've gathered up and you take it down to the enlisted maintenance area, and I said, I don't care what you do with it. I did not have a single enlisted man come back to me and ask for their $10 back. I won't talk to you about the officers, because I had some officers that come back because they wanted their $10 back. No. So, quickly, I'd say if I had a chance to do it again, I'd probably do it again. Any questions? If not, I'm going to get you all out here. Thank you.
Okay. He didn't get into what he's doing now since he retired, but he lives north of Hutchinson. He farms, and he's not just a little farmer. He farms about 3,000 acres and has some help, but he also still flies some jets and props and you name it. Flies some pipelines for oil companies and whatever. So he stays current with his flying, although he told me he had a little medical problem here that kind of sidelined him for a month or two. You didn't tell us anything about your family. You got a daughter in Texas, and just briefly tell us there. And
Sorry about that. I've got a daughter in Corpus Christi, Texas. She's a school teacher. She's doing a fine job. I have a son that lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. He is an IT tech like this gentleman here, making a heck of a lot more money than what I'm making. 1999, early 2000, my beautiful bride went to the hospital and she got some very bad news. The doctor went to the flight surgeon, told the flight surgeon, you call Fred and you tell him he needs to go home. Now, there's one person on base that could tell me to go home, and that was the flight surgeon. Found out she had cancer. Told her everything was going to be okay. I was going to work everything out. Part of our job in the B-1 world was night ops. Started night ops, come home one Friday morning. Her car was still in the driveway. She had passed away overnight while I was out doing my thing. Like I said earlier, she raised my kids while I was out running around. So I just say to people that I meet that want to know about my wife is she did one hell of a job raising 2 kids. And my kids are proud of her. I'm very proud of her. And it's hard to find a replacement of somebody like that. So, and anything else?
well, a lot of us were married during that time, so let's have a big round of applause for all the spouses. And as far as farming goes, I had a sister-in-law that told my brother, John, I believe you'll farm until the money's gone.
I'm going to tell you this. I might just padlock the doors before the money's gone.
Okay, one more round of applause. Thank you, Fred. Appreciate you coming. Come back next month and hear our Air Force veteran and hear Elsa tell her story about the concentration camp in Russia. So I'm going to let you go. We went over. He lied to me. He said, I probably won't even speak 30 minutes, but I said, we'll give you a full 30, and he took advantage of it. Remember Memorial Weekend coming up? We put out crosses Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. We have services, 4 different ones on Memorial Day, and then we pick up the crosses at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Can always use volunteers. All right, have a good evening. Thank you.